I never thought Poland could feel so small and lonely. I had moved there for work, chasing opportunities and promises of a life I didn't quite understand yet. The city was cold both in temperature and in spirit. My apartment overlooked gray rooftops and frozen streets, and I spent my evenings just scrolling through my phone, feeling this quiet ache for connection. I didn't know anyone. That all changed the day I met him. I had never needed a caregiver before. I had no illness, no injury, nothing that required professional help. But life has a way of pushing you toward people you need, even when you think you're fine. My grandmother, who lived with me in my small flat, had been struggling. She was independent and proud, but she had begun to forget small things, and sometimes she would stare blankly at the wall for minutes that felt like hours. It was unsettling. Eventually, I admitted that I couldn't do it all on my own and contacted an agency. When he arrived, I almost didn't believe it. He was taller than I expected, with dark eyes that seemed to understand the world too quickly, and a warm smile that reached his whole face. His name was Marco. He was from the Philippines, and though his Polish was heavily accented, he had this effortless charm that made communication feel intimate rather than difficult. At first, our interactions were strictly professional. I'd hover in the kitchen while he prepared meals for my grandmother, making small talk about the weather or asking polite questions about his family back home. Marco always answered with a soft laugh, his voice calm and melodic, and I found myself listening to him longer than necessary. He shared stories of Manila, of fiestas, of streets crowded with jeepneys and the smell of grilled street food. He spoke of his mother and younger siblings, of the sacrifices he had made to work abroad, and the subtle humor he injected into every memory made me smile more than I had in months. As days turned into weeks, our conversations grew deeper. I began to notice the little things, the way he remembered exactly how my grandmother liked her tea, the careful patience with which he taught me to cook adobo, and the quiet, respectful way he treated the elderly neighbors who would sometimes stop by. I realized he wasn't just a caregiver. He was someone who had mastered kindness as a skill, someone who could make a life brighter simply by being present. One evening, I was sitting on the balcony with a cup of tea when I saw him laughing in the kitchen with my grandmother. It was a small, ordinary moment, but something inside me stirred. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea in my hands. I was suddenly aware of the color of his eyes, the way his hair fell slightly across his forehead, the sincerity in his laughter. I had to look away before I embarrassed myself by staring. It was weeks later, after a long day at work, that I realized I missed him when he wasn't around. I'd stayed late at the office, exhausted, and returned to find Marco already preparing my grandmother's dinner. Seeing him move through the space with calm efficiency, I was struck by a sudden, overwhelming awareness that I had grown attached, far more than I had intended. "Polish weather is colder than I expected," he said lightly as he handed me a plate of food. "Yes," I replied, trying to sound casual though my heart was racing. "Much colder than I imagined." He laughed softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But maybe you get used to it, little by little." Those words lingered long after dinner. I couldn't help but notice how often I sought him out, how I found excuses to linger in the kitchen, to ask him about his day, to share a thought or a memory. I was falling for him, quietly, unsure and terrified. Our friendship deepened naturally. I learned to cook Filipino dishes under his guidance. He introduced me to music from home, singing softly in the evenings while my grandmother slept. I began to understand more about his culture, and through that understanding, I felt connected to a part of the world I had never imagined. The stories he told me about life in the Philippines were so vivid, I could almost see the streets, hear the jeepneys, and feel the warmth of the tropical sun. One evening, after my grandmother had gone to bed, we stayed behind in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. There was a quiet intimacy in the silence. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt an ache in my chest. "Marco," I said softly, "do you ever feel lonely here?" He looked up, eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I also feel like I belong. Here with your grandmother and with you." I blinked, startled. My heart raced. "With me?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he said simply. "I like being here." I like being with you. It was that night in the small warmth of our kitchen that something shifted. We laughed, we shared stories, we lingered longer than was strictly necessary. It wasn't a grand confession, but a quiet mutual understanding that something had begun between us, fragile but undeniable. Our relationship grew slowly, tenderly, carefully. There were challenges, cultural differences, language barriers, and the delicate nature of his work. But each time we shared a smile, a gentle touch, a laugh in the kitchen, the worry melted away. We found joy in small things. Weekend walks in the park, sharing favorite foods, teasing each other about mispronunciations. Marco taught me Tagalog phrases, and I laughed at my own inability to roll my tongue properly. I introduced him to pierogi and bigos, and he delighted in the richness of Polish cuisine. One winter evening, as the city glistened under a thin layer of frost, we walked together through a quiet street. I felt him take my hand, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I held on, marveling at the warmth of his fingers against mine. "You make Poland feel less cold?" I said softly. He laughed, a gentle, knowing sound. "And you make my life feel brighter," he replied. Our connection wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether love could truly blossom between us. But each time I looked at him, each time I saw the kindness in his eyes and the way he cared for my grandmother, I knew that this was real. Love, I realized, doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it appears quietly, in shared laughter and mutual care and the comfort of a hand held in winter. As time passed, I began to imagine a future that once seemed impossible. I imagined trips to the Philippines, meeting his family, learning more about his world. I imagined introducing him as my partner, not just a caregiver. The thought filled me with a quiet joy I hadn't known for years. One afternoon, as we sat on the balcony drinking tea, my grandmother beside us, Marco reached for my hand. "I want to be with you," he said simply. "Not just here or not just now. I want to be with you. In the future, if you'll have me." I felt tears prick my eyes, tears of relief, happiness, and love. "I will," I whispered. "I want that too." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was a quiet, enduring truth, formed from months of shared life, of small gestures of laughter and care. I realized that love sometimes doesn't announce itself with grand statements. It sneaks in quietly through shared moments and acts of kindness, through understanding and acceptance. As winter melted into spring, our bond grew stronger. And through it all, the city no longer felt lonely. The streets no longer felt cold. I had moved to Poland seeking opportunity, but I had found something entirely unexpected, a connection that transcended distance and culture. I had found love in the quiet, everyday moments. As I watched Marco laugh with my grandmother, the warmth of the spring sun on our balcony, I realized that life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the person you need the most isn't someone you were looking for, but someone who quietly arrives and changes everything. I never thought I would fall in love in a foreign city in a winter that seemed endless with a man who wasn't from my world. But love, I realized, doesn't care about borders, language, or expectation. It arrives quietly, insistently, and completely. And I would follow it anywhere, even to the Philippines, if it meant being with him. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever found love in an unexpected place, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.